How deep is your love? How deep is your love? I really need to learn. Hey there, just reminiscing about the Bee Gees and disco, among other matters of great importance. Welcome back. Good to see you again here at the Sefirat Omer project. Are you ready to count the Omer? Let's first add a new midah to our virtual toolbox. Ohev et HaMakom, loving God. How deep is your love is not just a big and fabulous question asked by the one and only Bee Gees. Jewish tradition asks a similar question. How deep is God's love for us? Our prayer book, our Siddur, reveals just how deep. In the morning, we recite Ahava Rabbah. Deep is your love for us, Adonai, our God, and great is your compassion. Our maker and ruler, our ancestors trusted you, and you taught them the laws of life. And then in the evening, we recite Avat Olam, translated, unending is your love for your people, the house of Israel. Torah and mitzvot, laws and precepts have you taught us. For sure, God's love flows abundantly. But what about our love for God? How deep is our love? According to the Shema and Ve'ahavta, our love is all heart, all soul, and all might. Put differently, our love is all mind, all spirit, and all body. From Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5, we chant the following. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha B'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol meodecha. You shall love the eternal, your God, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. That love's pretty deep. But for some of us, there's a challenge. After all, how can any one of us be commanded to love someone else, God or otherwise? Isn't love ultimately a choice? What if our love doesn't come that easily? Maybe we can't love God, or don't want to love God, or aren't sure how to love God, or we don't know whether we love God. Maybe we're wrestling with our faith, but our love for God feels elusive, even with our hearts open. One thing here I want to emphasize is that there are multiple pathways to Jewish authenticity. Faith in God, a loving faith in God, is but one of them. We can turn to the Torah, the practice of mitzvot, our community, tikkun olam, being a mensch, our affection for the land and people of Israel. There are so many alternatives on how we can live authentically as Jewish people. But then again, faith is one of those things that takes practice. And practice can often make progress. So then we could follow the Rambam's game plan. When a person contemplates God and God's great and wondrous works and obtains a glimpse of God's incomparable and infinite wisdom, the person will straight away love and glorify God. Or we could immerse ourselves in Talmud Torah, in the lifetime study of our Torah and its wisdom. We can live out the phrase, Vishinantam Livanacha. We can teach Torah to our children, or anyone for that matter, willing to imprint the instructions and wisdom of God upon their or our hearts. And in so doing, we can learn about God's ways. We can emulate God's ways, which in turn has a way of revealing our love for God. So, this means when we love our neighbors, we love God. When we give tzedakah, we love God. When we seek peace, yes, we love God. It all sounds so simple, right? Doing a mitzvah, fulfilling a commandment is about loving God. But seeing as today is Yom HaShoah, and we remember the Holocaust, we know life is far more complicated and sometimes far more devastating. And for many, the Shoah truly shattered the covenant between us and God. So, loving God post-Holocaust just seems so difficult sometimes, if not impossible. And yet, despite this brokenness, there are many who still remain, as the great Rabbi Irving Greenberg says, so in love with the dream of redemption that they have volunteered to carry on the mission to love this dream of redemption despite the terrors of the Shoah. To love this dream of redemption is a way of loving God. To love our liberation from bad things like hatred, from prejudice, from violence, from oppression, from marginalization. When we liberate our things from these bad things that plague our society, we do our best to grow our love for the Holy One of Blessing. In the words of artist Samuel Bach, throughout their long history of violation and abuse, the tablets have maintained their eternal power to emerge as a guide for those who choose to accept their covenant. Their power cannot be totally annihilated. Out of the fragments, new tablets are being created. With this renewed covenant, Chevre, somehow even more lovable in its brokenness, we can find a pathway, a renewed pathway, a strengthened and reinforced pathway to a greater love for God. So let's have at it. Practice makes progress. Let's count the Omer. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al Sefirat Omer. Blessed are you, Adonai, sovereign over time and space, who makes us holy with your commandments, commands us to count the Omer. And so we complete our counting, our Sefirat Omer, by recognizing that we are here at the 12th day of the Omer, and that corresponds to 1 week and 5 days of the Omer. We read in the Hebrew, Hayom Shnei Masar Yom Shehem Shavua Echad Chamisha Yamim LaOmer. Repeating, today is the 12th day of the Omer, which corresponds to 1 week and 5 days of the Omer. As we close, let us look forward to a week in which we pay kindness forward, in which we find ways to make the world a better place, in which we find ways to be a force for good, even if we're quarantined, even if we're stuck at home, or even if we're going out in the world to make a difference, staying safe all the way. Anything that we do to improve the world in which we live in is a way of loving God. And lastly, as we take into our hearts the memories of the 6 million human beings Jewish human beings who perished in the Shoah, and the 10 million beings who died altogether. Let us ensure that their lives weren't lost in vain. And to the extent that there were many, despite the terrors, despite the horrible outcomes through which they lived and perished, there were many who still believed through it all and found ways in pursuing and perpetuating their Judaism and living a resilient life. It's in this spirit and in the power of remembering these individuals, these many, many millions of individuals, some way, somehow, remembering them for a blessing and knowing that if we can muster even a small amount of love for God, just like they did despite everything, we will do best to honor their memories. So give it a try. Practice makes progress. Lihitraot. Take care. Stay well.